sense, do you want to put your foot on their neck and keep pressing them in order that you bring about some sort of relatively quick victory? And what is the danger if you do that, as opposed to trying to end up with some sort of negotiated settlement in the
Yes.
next 3 to 6 months?
That given the volume, the sheer volume of very expensive ordnance that Ukraine's allies in Europe and the West have sent to that country to use against Russia, the capacity of those countries to keep doing that, which is it's all being used up as fast as it's sent to Ukraine, that is not inexhaustible and will lead to something like a stalemate and then pressure on Ukraine to find some sort of peaceful settlement. Do you share any part of that view?
Yes, I do. We can come on to the latter part of it in a minute, but there's no doubt at all that we have put a lot of equipment and material and ammunition in particular to Ukraine. The bottom line is, we may have discussed this before, but the bottom line is, after the Cold War, we reduced our stocks of material, including ammunition, substantially. I mean, hugely. We used to have 3 big ammunition depots, for example, in this country. We've now only got one. And that applies in all sorts of other supplies as well, in terms of logistic support and so on. So we have burnt our way through a lot of stuff. And companies like BAE Systems and the other defense companies are producing more, but to enable them to produce the sort of quantities we would need to supply Ukraine if this war was to go on for a long time, they need to set up production lines. And to set up new production lines, they need money. And the government, as I understand it, are not giving them that money. They're expecting BAE Systems to fund it themselves, and I don't think they will. So we've definitely used a lot. We are running short. The Americans have also supplied an awful lot, and other nations have supplied less, but nonetheless, they will be affected too.
Right.
Now, to pick up the second point,
Yeah.
winter is obviously now here. Temperatures are going down. If the weather does the ground hardens. What we've seen in the last couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks really, is a sort of impasse. The Russians have obviously pulled back to the east side of the river. The Ukrainians, who are just tired, I mean, they've used up huge quantities of people and material. So everybody's sort of, taking what we would call a strategic pause. The Russians reached a sort of, what, again, in military doctrine we would talk about as a culminating point, where they realized their logistics was running out. Their position was untenable, and they had to pull back and consolidate and rearm and resupply. How long that will go on for, and in the context of the question, would Russia then conduct some sort of winter offensive this side of Christmas or shortly in the new year, in order to put pressure on Ukraine to force them to the negotiating table, I think is certainly a possibility. I don't think there's any probabilities in any of this, but it's certainly a possibility.
I put, for the sake of argument, a contrary case to our colleague at the time. Let me put it to you, which is that if you put all of this on a balance sheet, the effort and the munition supply to Ukraine have been a very good investment from the point of view of the West. It's exposed Russia as being nothing like the military power and the military threat that we'd imagined that it was just a very short while ago. America's engagement compares favorably to everything that it did in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in other operations around the world in that respect, and others. So it makes sense to carry on like this. And if there is an opportunity over the winter to replenish on the Western side as well as the Russian side, well, again, that might be worth doing. No one wants a longer war than is necessary, but you see the argument, and it seems to have some force to it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's certainly true that what we've exposed is a very much weaker, Russian military than we anticipated. Now, we need to be careful here because, again, putting together the reality of what's been happening over the last few months is not easy. But it's pretty clear to me, anyway, that the Russian military, senior military, did not really know that Putin was going to, order an invasion of Ukraine till almost at the last minute. They were conducting exercises and doing various other things, but they were therefore, in that sense, unprepared. They've been through obviously a very difficult period, but nonetheless, that said, I do think what we've seen exposed is certainly a less than capable Russian military than I would have anticipated, and certainly one less capable than we anticipated during the Cold War years. I did 9 years in Germany during the Cold War, and we thought the Warsaw Pact, particularly the Russians, were extremely powerful. So yes, they are under pressure. Yes, we are doing collectively pretty well, if not very well, in all of this. They've certainly not achieved their aims. The question comes, I suppose, in one sense, do you want to put your foot on their neck and keep pressing them in order that you bring about some sort of relatively quick victory. And what is the danger if you do that, as opposed to trying to end up with some sort of negotiated settlement in the
Yes.
next 3 to 6 months?
That's really,
Um,
really interesting. Yeah. Now, just have a listen to this now, Tim, because Ukraine's First Lady, Elena Zelenska, she was addressing
yeah.
MPs and peers at Westminster today. Well, have a listen to what she had to say.
It's important to understand that Russia brought the systematic violence. In many deoccupied towns and villages, we find the chambers, torture chambers, which were organized by the occupiers. We have documented thousands of crimes, including the sexual violence. The youngest girl who was raped by the Russian occupiers was 4 years old. The oldest survivor was 85. These are the victims we know. How many victims we still don't know about? Therefore, I'm addressing you, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I'm addressing the United Kingdom, because we know that justice is one of the benchmarks of the British way of life. You have got a powerful experience of the international law and defending the values of humanism. That's why we are addressing Britain. We are fighting for justice, but justice, like victory, is not possible without allies.
So that's Elena Zelenska speaking to MPs and peers earlier on, Tim. Look, I mean, it goes without saying that some of the tales of atrocities committed by Russian forces in Ukraine are literally stomach-churning. And when you hear these stories, is there also a strategic effect? Does it make it more difficult to contemplate reaching any kind of peace with Putin that does not add up to defeat for Russia?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think the emotional energy and the emotional drain of all that's been going on is a significant factor. Now, we have to recognize that, and in one sense, I don't like saying this, but this is a reality of war. I've actually recently been watching the World at War series, which you may remember was put together back in the 50s and 60s, I think, about World War II. And what we saw happening in World War II was, just very similar to what's happening in Ukraine today.
Yes.
I watched the mass graves being dug up in places like Iraq. I've seen what people do to each other in places like the Balkans and in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. So these terrible atrocities are not new. They have to be dealt with, and they will be dealt with in due course. And yes, they will have an emotional effect on people. But ultimately, if I'm brutally honest, I think when the time comes to have to negotiate a recognition that we need to bring this to an end in some shape or form, that will take priority. And dealing with the aftermath is another issue, in inverted commas.
Tim, fascinated to talk to you. Thank you. That's Major General Tim Cross in our briefing room today.